Hey guys, I just wanted to make a quick video for you all about our basic signal flow that we have running through our console channel strips. I know you guys know a lot of this information already, but I still think it's a really helpful review. And the reason for that is because this is something that you have to come back to every single week. You're always going to be looking at your channel strips. So channel strip, what I mean by that is that's everything from preamp, high pass filter, gate, EQ, and compressor. All of that makes up your channel strip, and it flows through in a specific order. And when you're running a sound check, you're going to be looking at that flow, that signal flow through the console for each channel that you're working with. And the reason it's important to keep coming back to it and not just set it and forget it, and not just rely on presets that are on the console, is that we have a lot of different players coming through. We have different instruments, different guitars, drummers who hit with different levels of intensity. And for that reason, what you're getting coming into the console is going to be different, quite different from week to week. So you need to always be going back and looking and making sure that everything is right for you when you're doing your sound check and rehearsal on Thursdays. So the first step that you need to do when sound checking a channel is check the gain. Gain is part of the preamp. First, for this video, we're going to be using just this first kick drum mic, so I'm going to go ahead and select that. All right, so we have our kick drum selected, and up here at the top left, you will see all the components of your channel strip. You've got preamp, high pass filter, which is really part of your preamp. You have gate, you have EQ, and you have compressor. So the first thing that you need to do is check your gain. So I'm going to play this kick drum track here, and we're just going to make sure that the gain looks all right. All right, that looks good. What we're looking for is for the signal to reach the top of the green and just kind of touching that first part of the yellow. You never want it to hit the red, that means it's clipping. But kind of where it transitions from green over to yellow, that's kind of the sweet spot for the gain knob. So that's all set. Let's go ahead and go and hit this processing button so we can see in a little more detail what we have going on with this channel strip. After you set your gain, you can move on to high pass filtering. This is going to be really useful. Obviously with kick drum, we want all the low end, so we're not going to filter out too much low end. The high pass filter is filtering out low end. But for things like guitars, sometimes keyboards, you're going to want to filter out some low end. So what you would do is you would just play the track, or have the keyboardist or guitarist play for you, and then you'll sweep the high pass filter up until you notice that it's cleaned up some of the boominess in the low end, but hasn't really cut out any of the tone. So let me show you a little bit. It won't be quite as drastic on kick drum because, again, we do want that low end. All right, so that's obviously way too far, so I'm going to back it back down. So this is with it in and then out. So that's all we'll do for the kick drum when it comes to high pass filtering. You might have noticed that it got a little bit cleaner with some of the rumbly low end stuff that'll build up just at the bottom. All right, next we're going to move on to our gate. Gate is really important for drums. What a gate does is it is going to only allow the audio to pass through once that audio reaches a certain volume level. So for instance, with drums, you really only want to hear that specific drum that you're miking, in this case the kick drum. We don't really want to hear much of the cymbals. We don't want to hear much of that snare drum coming through. We only want to hear the kick drum. Let me play the track for you. You'll notice that you do hear quite a bit of bleed from the other drums. So we're hearing quite a bit of snare drum in there. So we're going to use the gate to try to cut that out. You have some different controls. First, let's talk about these two right here. We have the threshold and the depth. The threshold is the point in which the gate is going to open. So when your audio passes the threshold, the gate will open and it will allow that signal to pass through. The depth is how much it is going to bring that signal down when the gate is not allowing audio to pass through. So right now it's ducking the audio down 60 decibels, so it's going to be really exaggerated at first, and that's good because it'll tell us exactly what we're getting. Up here you have the attack, release, and hold controls. What those are is that's shaping what's called the envelope of the gate. So the attack is how fast the gate's going to open once the audio passes the threshold. The release is how long it's going to take the gate to close down after the audio goes below the threshold again. And the hold is how long the gate is going to hold open completely after the audio dips back down below the threshold. So release and hold are similar. The difference is the hold means that the gate is going to hold completely open for this case 124 milliseconds after the audio goes back below the threshold. But for release, after the audio goes below the threshold for 52.8 milliseconds, the audio will gradually be getting softer until it's completely gone. So those are what those controls are. Right here is in or out. So right now the gate is out. And then over here, the side chain filter. What that means is this is a filter that the gate is using to detect when to open and close. So this is going to be useful for us for this kick drum because the kick drum has a lot of low end and it doesn't have as much high end. It does have some, but not as much. So by having the side chain filter in and kind of swept down, we have a low pass filter going down maybe to like 125 hertz. Then you have a high pass filter coming up just to clean out some of the rumbly stuff again. But this filter is going to help the gate distinguish between what we want to pass through and what we don't. So this will help us to get the kick drum to pass through while the snare gets cut off. Because the snare is going to live higher up in the frequency range. So if we cut that out in the detection, the side chain filter, then the gate's not going to open when the snare drum is hit. It's only going to open when the kick drum is hit. So I'm going to just play the track, and I'm going to mess around with the gate and try to dial it in. Just watch and kind of see what I'm doing. So the snare's still coming through, so I need to increase the threshold some. All right, that's about right for the threshold. Only the kick drum's coming through. Now let's mess with the depth. Right now it sounds really unnatural because the depth is taking the audio down 60 decibels, which is pretty extreme. So let's try maybe 10 decibels of depth and see if that sounds better. So it's in now. Here it is out. It's a lot better. You're getting more isolation on the kick drum. I'm going to lower the attack a little bit. Gives a little more punch to the sound. Let me lower the hold a little bit. It sounds pretty good. Here it is without. And then back in. All right, that's a good start with the gate. If you get the gate down, you'll really notice a big difference in the quality of your drum sounds. They'll start to sound cleaner and tighter. So work on using a gate. Next would be insert. We're going to pass over that for now, and we're going to go to EQ. So this is the EQ. We've already done the high pass filter, so we don't need to mess with that. That will be located here on the EQ module as well as the preamp module. But let's talk about EQ. EQ is basically just a volume knob that is specific to a certain range of frequencies. For instance, this low band right here that's at 65.9 hertz, it has a volume right here. So if I turn it up, it's turning up 65.9 hertz and frequencies surrounding that. So you have your frequency control right here. You have your decibel reading right here, which is how much you're turning it up or how much you're cutting it out. And then right here is called your Q control, which is basically the width of this bell curve. It's going to adjust how many of the surrounding frequencies are going to be affected by your EQ boost or cut. So you'll see if I move this up, it gets more narrow. If I move this down, it gets more wide, and it's affecting more frequencies around that center frequency of 65.9 hertz. Keep in mind when you're boosting frequencies at a really tight Q, it can be good if you need to isolate something, but it can also tend to sound a little unnatural. You can get away with that on drums a lot more than other instruments, but just keep that in mind that you don't want to go too narrow when you're boosting. So I'm going to play the kick drum, and I'm going to mess around a little bit with EQ and see if we can get a cleaner and tighter kick drum sound. Something you can do to find treble frequencies is to pull up one of the bands and sweep until you find something that doesn't sound quite right. Okay, so that's a really boxy frequency. You hear how it sounds really hollow. Let's widen this out and then cut it out a little bit. That's better. And now let's look at the high end. So I'm going to change this high end curve to a bell curve. There we go. Let's find the spot in the kick drum where it really starts to punch through the attack. About right there. So let's just boost that a little bit just to get some presence. Okay, that's a pretty good starting point. Let me take it out and then back in so you can hear the difference. That's dry, that's without the EQ. Sounds a little bit boxy and not quite big enough. Here it is with the EQ back in. Much better, a lot bigger and fatter. All right, so that'll be a good starting point with EQ for the kick drum. Last aspect we want to talk about of this channel strip is the compressor. I'll make a separate video on compression because it is a little bit complicated, but I'll show you the basics for today. Basically what compression is you have to kind of think about it as the opposite of a gate. What it's doing is when the signal passes a certain threshold, the compressor is going to clamp down and lower the volume of that signal. So it's compressing the sound. And the reason that that's a desirable effect is it makes things sound a lot more consistent. For instance, if you want your kick drum in a song to sound nice and tight and consistent, you don't want some of the kicks to be soft and some of them to be really, really loud. Obviously, some of that's the drummer, but we can help the drummer out a little bit by compressing his kick drum. It also serves to make the kick drum sound a little bit punchier and fatter and just makes it sound a little bit more professional overall. So let's talk again you controls. So it's going to be similar controls to the gate. You You have over here the threshold. Again, that is going to be the point at which the compressor will kick in. If the audio passes the threshold, the compressor will activate. So that's your threshold. Your ratio is basically how much the signal is going to be decreased when the audio comes over the threshold. So 1 to 1, it's not going to do anything. Let's raise it up to about 4 to 1 and talk about that. So that's going to be a pretty aggressive, actually a pretty average compressor setting. If you went all the way up to, say, 10 to 1, that's when you start getting into limiters where it's almost not going to let the audio get any louder. But 4 to 1 is probably a good place to start with this kick drum. You have what's called makeup gain. You use the gain control because when you are applying the compressor, you're actually lowering the volume of the loudest hits. So you want to make that gain up so you get the same volume level coming out of the compressor that you had going in, just more even. So in essence, your soft hits are going to be increasing in volume through compression. Attack and release is similar to when we talked about it on the gate controls. So attack is how long it's going to take the compressor to activate. And for drums, we want a little bit longer of an attack. 50 milliseconds is about right for a drum as a starting point. If you have a faster attack, it's going to squash down on what's called the transient or the attack of the drum because it's going to engage really quickly. As soon as the drummer hits the drum, if your attack is really fast like this, the compressor is going to engage immediately and lower that transient or that attack down. So we want to let that transient come through when we're messing with compression on drums. And then release is going to be how fast the compressor goes back to not compressing the signal at all after the audio comes back below the threshold. Here's our in and out control again. We have what's called parallel compression, which means it's going to take a copy of the audio. The dry is going to be your unaffected signal, so your uncompressed signal, and then the wet is going to be your compressed signal. You can use that to blend it in. This is a good technique if you want to be really aggressive with the compression, get it nice and compressed, but you also want to maintain the natural feel. You would blend those in together. You would blend the dry and the wet together until you get a mix that you like. And then sidechain filter is the same as it was on the gate. This filter is going to help us to allow the compressor to detect the kick drum a little more cleanly. So I'm going to play the audio and I'm going to dial in a compressor setting that I like for this kick drum. Try to listen really closely. Compression can be a subtle effect, but there will be a noticeable difference at the end. So let's look at the makeup gain. We're going to need to add, right here you can see that we're taking out maybe 5 decibels each time that kick drum hits. So let's add 5 decibels of makeup gain. Let's hear a before and after. All right, that sounds good. So you can hear that adding the compression just added a nice fat quality to that kick drum, made it sound a little bit bigger and more punchy. So that about wraps it up for the channel strip overview. You need to work on adjusting all of these parameters for each channel. And this will become like second nature to you. You'll get faster and faster at it. But it is really important because, like I said, we do have a lot of different musicians coming in, playing different instruments with different playing styles. So your settings are going to have to change. You know, and for instance, this was a pretty aggressive kick drum. Someone was hitting it pretty hard. If you had a drummer come in and they played softer, this gate setting would probably cut out the kick drum altogether. So that's why it's really important to pay attention to these things. You might get in the middle of practice and notice that you don't have any punch in your mix and the kick drum's not coming through. If it's a soft drummer and you've had a hard drummer play the week before, it's probably because the gate needs to be adjusted. So just have your ear open for things like that, and always be checking those things on Thursday nights. That's what those rehearsals are for. So I hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next video.